speakers, and the first one will be Pierre Descouvrement from the University Libre, Brussels, and he will talk about reaction models in nuclear astrophysics.
Okay, thank you. So, of course, I'd like first to thank the organizers for inviting me here. And more specifically, I'd like to thank you for being here so early and after the conference dinner. So thanks a lot. So I'm going to talk about nuclear astrophysics, and in particular about reaction models, which are essentially used in nuclear astrophysics. So this is the plan of the talk. I will start with a short introduction, and then I will briefly give an overview of the different properties which are specific to nuclear astrophysics. Then I will also provide a general overview of the different reaction models, which in fact are essentially scattering theories adapted to nuclear astrophysics. And then I will briefly describe two methods which are widely used in this field, microscopic models to predict cross-sections, or the air matrix methods, which is essentially used to fit cross-sections and to extrapolate them to low energies. So this is this diagram represents the abundances of the elements in the solar system as a function of the mass. So this is a purely observational diagram, but as a nuclear physicist, you can read many things on this diagram. First, you see that hydrogen and helium are by far the most abundant element. They are produced during the Big Bang. And then all of elements, which are called metals, have a much lower composition. So you see carbon, oxygen here. If you look in this region here, there is a gap between helium and carbon, and this is a well-known nuclear origin. The reason is that there is no stable nuclei with 5 nucleons or with 8 nucleons. So these are a clear explanation from nuclear physics. Another thing that you can see is that carbon is very abundant, and again the reason comes from nuclear physics. This is due to the triple alpha process, and the triple alpha process presents a low energy resonance, which is known as the Hall state, and which is the reason why the triple alpha reaction rate is so high. And then you can see different peaks, lead, barium, iron, lead, barium, lead, and these peaks are also associated to nuclear physics properties, to shell closure. You know that a shell-closed nucleus is more bound, so it's more difficult to destroy it, and this is why the abundance is larger. And you see something similar at a smaller scale here. You see this kind of even-odd effect. And you know that the binding energy for an even nucleus is slightly larger than for an even nucleus, for an odd nucleus, sorry. And this is the reason why the abundances for two neighbors elements are slightly different. So there are many things that you can learn from this diagram, and the role of nuclear astrophysics is to explain this type of abundance patterns from the nuclear reactions. So let me come to general properties in nuclear astrophysics. So you know that the elements are produced by different types of reactions. And in the star, there are essentially 3 types, and in fact, more specifically, 2 types of reactions. One is transfer. So in the transfer reactions, you have nucleons which are transferred from the projectile to the target. We have the radiative capture, where a proton, a neutron, or an alpha particle is captured by the target. And you have some, in fact 2, reactions which involve weak capture. And the most important one is the PP. And of course, this is the first reaction in the CNO cycle in hydrogen burning. This is the reaction which allows you to create elements heavier than the proton. And these three reactions arise from different origins: strong interaction for transfer, electromagnetic interaction for radiative capture, and the weak interaction for weak capture. And of course, the cross-section follow this hierarchy. Transfer cross-sections are in general much larger than radiative capture, and radiative capture are much larger than weak capture reactions. Okay, so let me now give very general expressions for these different cross-sections, and then I will move to more specific models. So this is the transfer cross-section from a channel C to a channel C prime. You see here an example where two nucleons are transferred between the projectile and target. So here what you want to know is the collision matrix here. So this is what provides you with the transfer cross-sections. And this scattering matrix may be obtained from different models. But whatever the model you use, the formula for the transfer cross-section remains the same. You have here an example. So imagine you have reaction A plus B, so A plus B giving C plus D. You have here A plus B threshold. And I take as an example helium-3 So this would be the helium-3D threshold. You have the scattering theory in the entrance channel, and then you have a transfer to this final threshold. And the compound nucleus here is lithium-5. So the second important type of reactions is radiative capture. So here you have two colliding nuclei which produce one compound nucleus with a photon emission. And this is provided by the electromagnetic interaction. So this is computed by first-order perturbation theory. And what you have here is the capture cross-section, and you have to compute matrix elements of the electromagnetic operator, so either electric or magnetic, between two wave functions. One wave function is the final state wave function, and you can see it more clearly on this diagram. So here you have the bound state wave function, and the initial state is a scattering state at some energy E. So you are left with the computation of these matrix elements. So we know that in general we can use the long wavelength approximation. So I give it here typical values. If you take a photon of 1 MeV, so the wavelength associated with this photon is more than 1,000 Fermis, which is much larger than the typical size of the system, and this is the origin of the long wavelength approximation. So here is the same formula for the weak capture, and it resembles very much radiative capture cross-section. The main difference is that here you don't have anymore the electromagnetic operator, but Fermi and Gamow-Teller operators, which provide transition in the beta decay. So as I mentioned, there is one famous element which is PP. And the cross-section is, of course, very small because you are dealing with the weak interaction. So there is no measurement of the PP, but there are very precise calculations because this PP interaction is supposed to be very well known. So we have what is supposed to be a very reliable estimate of the reaction rate. There is another reaction which plays a role not for producing energy, but because it produces high energy neutrinos, and this is the helium-3p reaction. And well, to be complete, I should also mention fusions. So when the star gets heavier, there are fusion reactions, the treatment is similar to transfer reactions. The main difference is that there are many output channels. So this is why there is some statistical treatment which is involved. And typical examples are carbon-carbon, oxygen-oxygen. So these reactions were already mentioned during the conference. So let's look at the general properties of a nuclear reaction in a star. This is the field of nuclear astrophysics. So imagine you have a reaction with a threshold here. You start from a scattering energy E. And whatever the process you are interested in, this is the first step. So this is common to all reactions. And then what you want to have an idea, to have an insight on the reaction, is the potential between these two particles. And this is plotted here. So R here is the distance between the two colliding nuclei. You have here a typical potential. And this potential involves a nuclear part, which has a short range and is attractive, and a Coulomb part here. So this is for L equals 0, and if you increase the angular momentum, of course, you have a centrifugal barrier here. And the astrophysical domain is somewhere here. So I will show you later. So the important energies are always far below this Coulomb barrier. And this is the origin of small tunneling and of small cross-sections. Okay, so because of that, the cross-sections are essentially dominated by Coulomb effects, and this can be measured by the Sommerfeld parameter here. Of course, I'm talking about charged particles, and if you are dealing with neutrons, this is not true anymore. Neutrons have very specific treatment. So there is also a strong dependence on angular momentum. You see the centrifugal term here, and this is stronger for nucleons. So you have here a factor h bar square over 2 mu. So if you take a nucleon, mu is the mass. The reduced mass is about 1. If you take alphas, the reduced mass is about 4. So this centrifugal term is more and more important for protons and neutrons than for alphas or for heavier systems. So the energy dependence of the cross-sections is essentially provided by this penetration factor. So at low energies, this can be associated with the probability to cross the barrier. And if you look at this penetration factor here as a function of energy, this is done for the DD reaction. This is just an example. You have L equals 0 here. So L equals 0 drops very fast at low energies. You are essentially interested in this energy region. And if you increase the angular momentum, of course, you will also increase the height of the Coulomb barrier, and then the penetration factor decreases. And to compensate this fast energy dependence, it's common to use in astrophysics the astrophysical S factor. And this is nothing but the cross-section times the energy and times the main contribution to the Coulomb penetration factor, which is exponential 2 pi eta. So this removes the main energy dependence coming from the Coulomb term. So there is an example here with helium-3 alpha gamma. I don't want to discuss the different data sets, just to illustrate the difference between cross-sections and the S factor. So these are different data sets and plotted as a function of the cross-section. So you see this cross-section decreases very fast, and this is due to the Coulomb effect. So the Coulomb barrier is somewhere here, and you are interested at energies very close to 0. And if you convert this cross-section in S factors, this is what you get. So this is the same energy range. And you can see now that the S factor is, of course, not constant, but the variation as a function of energy is much weaker. The energy dependence here is lower. For the S factor, I use here a linear scale instead of logarithmic scale for the cross-section. So there are two types of nucleosynthesis that astrophysicists are interested in. One is the Big Bang nucleosynthesis during the 3 first minutes of the universe, and there you have rather high temperatures, so high energies, and stellar nucleosynthesis. So this is the way to investigate how a star evolves and how it produces the energy. And what astrophysicists need is not directly a cross-section, but a reaction rate. So this is the average of the cross-section times the velocity and involving the Maxwell-Boltzmann dependence. And so if you look at this reaction rate, you see that it presents a maximum at some energy, which is important, and which is called the Gamow energy. And the range of interest for astrophysics is the Gamow range, and the Gamow range is defined by the energy E0 and by the width of this window. And you have here an example, typical example, C12 alpha gamma. So the burning temperature is 0.2 billion degrees, and the typical energy is 300 keV. So because of that, you see you always have astrophysical energies much lower than the Coulomb barrier, and as a general statement, you always have very small cross-sections. So the problem is that you have to extrapolate to low energies. Another problem specific to nuclear astrophysics is that for heavy nuclei, you are dealing with high-level densities, so you have to know the properties of many resonances. Of course, there is a problem with radioactive beams. You know that many important reactions involve radioactive nuclei, and of course, this is not a problem for theoreticians because we can deal with radioactive as well as stable beams, but for experiments, it's a big problem. And one of the specificity of nuclear astrophysics is that there is no systematics. In fact, each reaction has its own properties, and this is a nice thing because you never repeat the same procedure, but this may raise also some problem. And because of that, if you want to provide astrophysicists with a full set of data, in general, the experimental data are not enough. So you have to complement this experimental data, either by extrapolate the available data down to low energies, and this is the whole of the air matrix, or sometimes when you have no data at all, you want to get a first estimate of the cross-section of the reaction rate, and then you have to compute the cross-section with different type of models. So let me come to the different models used in nuclear astrophysics. And here I want to stress that there is nothing really specific to nuclear astrophysics. The models we use are well known in scattering theory. They are just adapted to the very low energies and to the conditions of nuclear astrophysics, like low-level densities and so on. And here, as I mentioned 1 minute ago, there are two points of view. One is what I call theoretical point of view. So then you compute the cross-sections from a model, from the wave functions, or the experimental point of view is assuming that you have data, but you want to extrapolate them to very low energies. So this is summarized here. So if you are dealing with what I call calculations, you have two essential categories. One non-microscopic, so you neglect the structure of the colliding nuclei, and the other one is microscopic. And here, in the non-microscopic models, you may have the potential model or DWBA for transfer. And here, in the microscopic approaches, you may have either cluster models or ab initio models, and Thomas Neff discussed that yesterday. And on the other side, if you want to make fit of data, then there is essentially the air matrix. Of course, you can use Breit-Wigner or other approximation, but these are equivalent to the air matrix. So let me briefly sketch a summary of these different approaches. So in the potential model, you neglect the structure of the colliding nuclei. So the Hamiltonian is rather simple, just a kinetic energy and a potential between these two particles. The problem is that, in general, you don't know which potential to use here. And here you have two different types of microscopic models. Here you include the nucleon structure, you include the Pauli principle, so in that sense they are microscopic models, but so you start from similar Hamiltonian, a nucleon Hamiltonian, but this is a very difficult problem to solve. And there are no developments in ab initio theories which try to solve the Hamiltonian exactly, but this is in general limited to 10 or 12 nucleons. And what we do in Brussels is to assume that the total wave functions is written in terms of clusters. And it can be 2 or 3 or more clusters, but this is a simplification of the calculation. So here in the potential model, well, the main advantage is that it is simple. There are different problems, because one is that you cannot use for transfer reaction. You have problems with the choice of the potential, and you cannot apply it when reaction channels are open. And this is here an example with oxygen 16. If you look at carbon 12 with alpha threshold, there is no open channels below. So you can use here the potential model if you want to describe C12 alpha gamma. But now you have here nitrogen 15 plus P. So you see there is below the carbon 12 plus alpha threshold, which is open even at 0 energy, and this is not included in the potential model. So the potential model cannot be applied to nitrogen 15 P gamma. Other problems is that some resonances may be absent in the potential model. One example is this 2 plus resonance here, which appears in the data on C12 alpha gamma, but this resonance is known to have a structure with a core excited. So this is absent in the potential model. You may have also a partial wave with 2 different states in the same partial wave. So here you have 2 minus states very close to each other. And this is also something which is impossible to reproduce by potential. So in summary, the potential model is simple, but it has a low predictive power and rather few applications. So as I said before, for microscopic theories, there are 2 approaches according to whether you assume a cluster structure for the wave function or not. So the ab initio, as Thomas mentioned yesterday, you don't assume any cluster structure for the colliding nuclei, and here you can use realistic nucleon-nucleon interactions. So this is different from cluster models, where you have to use an interaction which is adapted to the cluster model, and this is called effective interaction. And I just flash here one result that Thomas already showed yesterday. This is helium-3 alpha gamma. The colored points are the most recent data, and here is the mirror reaction T alpha gamma. There is another example which was considered by our group, the DD reactions. DD gamma, DDP, DDN, and there are 2 reasons why we started that. One is that these reactions are quite important in Big Bang nucleosynthesis, and the other reaction is more a nuclear physics question, because in DD gamma, the tensor force is expected to be very important, so it was a good challenge to try to reproduce that. And in DD gamma, so you have here the S factor. In DD gamma, you have captured to the ground state, which is 0 plus, the ground state of helium-4. So you have 2 regions here, one where the S factor increases, and this is typical of a capture from a D to an S wave, and here you have a plateau, and this is typical for a capture from 0 to S. And you can only hope to reproduce this kind of behavior if you include the tensor force. So these were the goals of the work. So it was published a few years ago. It was a collaboration between Niigata and Brussels. So we use here two realistic interactions, and we also wanted to compare with an interaction, an effective interaction, which is used in cluster models. So you can see here the results. This is the d gamma S factor as a function of the energy. You see the data are here, and these color lines comes from the two different interactions. So it's not a fit, it's not perfect, but you can see that we can reproduce this plateau here. And the Minnesota force, which does not include the tensor force, is unable to reproduce this plateau. We have similar findings for the transfer reactions. So we were looking at DDP and DDN. And you see this effective interaction as a solid line here. The Minnesota interaction is far below the data. And the two realistic interactions, including a tensor force, provide a rather good description. So this was the starting point for a new evaluation, which was initiated by Alain Koch et al. From observation now, it seems that the abundance of the deuterium is known with a very high accuracy, about 1.5%. And this accuracy is much better than the current accuracy on the data. So we wanted to evaluate the data in a way which is close to this 1.5%. And there are many measurements. So this is a summary of the latest measurements. And you have here the data of Aurora Tumino with the Trojan horse method. And here is a list of recent data. You have here the calculation by Arai, so our calculation here. This is for DDN, and this is for DDP. And you see here there is a spread which is much larger than the 1.5%. So as an evaluator, it's difficult to know who is correct, who is wrong. So what we did is to consider the ratio DDP, DDN. So you have the same entrance channel. You expect the same systematic uncertainties, and you expect this ratio to be close to 1. If the Coulomb interaction did not exist, this ratio would be exactly to 1, and the deviation from 1 comes from penetration factors in the neutron channel in DDN or in proton channel. And this is what we did here. So this is the ratio DDN over DDP as a function of energy. And you see there are different data sets here which are consistent with each other. So we plotted the result of our calculation with Arai et al. You see at high energies here, there are data by Schultz 72, and these also agree with the calculation. And well, these are the latest data coming from the Trojan horse. So I hope that the local organizers won't be upset with me with this calculation, but it seems that there is a shift in the data of the Trojan horse. Okay, so just one moment. Okay, so one result with the cluster approximation. So here you assume a cluster structure for the nucleus. Well, a textbook example is alpha plus alpha. This has been done 50 years ago. For nuclear astrophysics, the helium-3 alpha gamma was the first reaction which was considered in a microscopic way. I think it was 1981. So this is beryllium-7p gamma. So this is a 3-cluster structure. So you have 2 clusters for beryllium-7, alpha plus helium-3, and an external proton. There are 2 projections, one over the beryllium-7 and one over the full system to provide the angular momentum. And you have here a common description of spectroscopy. So you have here different properties of the ground state and on the first excited state of beryllium boron 8. And these are the result for the beryllium-7 P gamma. Okay, so I think I'm going to skip the air matrix and come to my conclusion. So I try to show you that we need low energy cross sections, and I didn't mention that, but for heavier system you also need resonance parameters. For the theory there are different approaches, and sometimes it's difficult to know which one is the best adapted for each case. You have fitting procedures, essentially the air matrix. For models, you have non-microscopic models such as the potential or DWA approaches. In microscopic models, you have two alternatives. One which is rather old, which is the cluster approximation, which was developed 50 years ago. And now there are more and more ab initio calculations where we try to be more fundamental, but this is limited to very light nuclei. And well, there are different current challenges in nuclear astrophysics. Well, one of them is the famous carbon-12 alpha gamma. I think it will be a challenge for still many years. The triple alpha process is also very, very interesting because there are different calculations which don't agree with each other. Well, for fusion, one question which should be addressed is how to explain resonances, and this was discussed previously in different talks, and also to go to heavier masses with this type of model, which is clearly a difficult problem. Okay, and I thank you for your attention.
Okay, questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the very nice talk. I was wondering, in your microscopic beryllium-7 plus P to boron 8 gamma, how did you get the parameters of your effective cluster Hamiltonian?
Well, we use a Minnesota interaction, which is well-defined, which contains one parameter, which is called the admixture parameter. And the standard value is 1. So you should use a value close to 1. And in this type of reaction, the binding energy of the final state, in that case boron 8, is very important. So we tuned this parameter to the binding energy of boron 8. So it's something 0.99, 1.01, something like that. But the binding energy is the main constraint for that.
More questions? Yeah, Jeff.
So you skipped the R matrix, which we experimentalists like to use a lot, which gives very beautiful descriptions of the data, but there are just so many free parameters. And I wonder if you could comment on R matrix a little bit, and also in particular about how, is there any sort of middle ground between using microscopic models to help constrain R matrix fits, or to somehow, it seems like we have the microscopic models that have no adjustment and don't fit the data perfectly, whereas you have R matrix, which you can fit an elephant, right? So.
Well, what I wanted to show on my air matrix slides is the importance of external constraints. For example, for the E1 part of C12 alpha gamma, there is this nitrogen 16, which is at first sight is completely different. But if you look in more detail, you can see that it provides strong constraint on the E1. And regarding your question about the link between microscopic model and air matrix, for E2, a possibility is something what we did, is to use the ANC provided by the microscopic model and use that as a constraint on the air matrix fit. But okay, I had to skip that. I was too optimistic in my timetable.
Thanks for the question. Any more questions? Yeah.
it's a little bit too general question, but for the nuclear structure theory, some theories are based on this harmonic oscillator. Then the wave function does not have the correct format outside, but or like a shell model or such kind of a merge particle wave function and so on. So it's a little bit in general, the general question on the reaction theory, but do you have some idea or maybe perspective to correctly treat this kind of situation?
Well, I don't use this kind of model. I know, for example, the shell model can provide you with electromagnetic transitions, and this is very useful. But if you want to treat the reaction, you have to pay attention to the long-range part of the wave function. You know, you have a low-energy scattering states, and this extends always to large distances. So if you want to compute any matrix element with these scattering states, you have to pay attention to the bound states and make sure that the long-range part of the bound state is correct. Otherwise, the results are completely meaningless. But if you are interested only in electromagnetic transitions between resonances, for example, then you don't need to pay attention to the long range, and then the shell model is appropriate, but not for capture cross-sections.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to move on. Thank you, Pierre.